Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to our presentation for scientific literature review of deep learning for our computational intelligence project. We are a group from section 1. In here, we will explain our review of 5 different papers. And it is done by our team, 5 of our team members, which started, let me introduce them. First being me, Aldika Barbagus Ananta, and I have all my group members here. Muhammad Rafi Atala, Muhammad Rafiqur Rahman, and Imam Darul Rizmi. We can continue to the next slide. So in here, there are 5 different paper that has been reviewed, mainly in the topic of deep learning, because we want to understand what is deep learning, and we want to review and write our thoughts about the content of each of the different papers. So as you can see, this is the reference list with different papers name and topic, but not topic, but coverage of deep learning. So we can continue to the presentation. First being the introduction, which will be explained by Imam Daru.
So the first part is introduction. So the introduction of this paper is deep learning is a type of machine learning and artificial intelligence that resembles how humans acquire specific types of knowledge. And also this study will discuss the literature of deep learning and the deep learning approaches that will be examined in this study is supervised learning, which consists of recurrent neural network and convolutional neural network. And then after that, the study also discusses how deep learning is implemented in the real world and advantages and disadvantages which will be referenced from 5 papers mentioned before.
Okay, so we can continue to the next talking point, which is the architecture of the mentioned 5 papers. So in here, we will cover about the different types of deep learning and some of the architecture that is implied in each of the papers. So we can continue to the next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, there are several approaches mentioned in the big learning paper. Deep learning can be categorized into 3 different approaches. First being supervised learning, second being partially supervised learning, and unsupervised learning. So supervised learning uses a labeled data set as the basis of the operation. In this approach, the environs have a collection of inputs and resultants output. And the main advantage of this technique is the ability to collect data or generate data output from the prior knowledge. Next is the partially supervised learning, which uses a semi-labeled dataset as the basis of the operation. The advantage of this technique is to minimize the reliability of labeled data, though this may bring a significant disadvantage. And lastly is this unsupervised learning, which uses no labeled data set as the basis of the operation. It makes it possible to implement a learning process in the situation where no labeled data is available. So each of the different approaches is differentiated with the approach of the data set used, with some using it majorly, with some also don't use it majorly. We can continue to the next slide. So in here, we will cover mostly about supervised learning, because in other papers, such as the image for the medical purpose deep learning, it mentioned that CNN, which is a part of supervised learning, is used as the architecture. So the first architecture that is mentioned, that is covered, is about recurrent neural network, or we can call it RNN. Which is the most common algorithm used in disciplines of deep learning. It uses sequential data in the network and embeds structure in the sequence of data delivers valuable information, and can be considered as a unit of short-term memory. The next one is the most common algorithm employed in field of deep learning. As I mentioned, it is also implemented in other paper that we cover. Compared to other techniques, CNN is able to identify relevant features with no human interference. CNN itself has been implemented in a wide range of fields, from speech processing, face recognition, and computer vision. We can continue the next slide. So this is the the architecture of both CNN and RNN. So RNN is represented by several hidden layers. You can see the basic architecture, how it represents itself. And next is CNN architecture, which is represented by an input image processing. which differentiate the layers. As you can see, this is the details. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, because partially supervised learning is not commonly used, we can continue to the explanation of the one of the technique of unsupervised learning, which is clustering. It is a technique that divides the population into a number of groups such that data points information focus within the same bunches and are more comparable to other information focuses within the same bunch that those in other bunches. In a straightforward words, the point is to isolate bunches with comparable characteristic and relegate them into a cluster. We can continue to the next slide. For the application, it can be explained by Fico.
Okay, so for the applications, we're going to take a look at each of the 5 papers that we selected to review. For the first article called Regulatory Features in Genomes from DNA Sequences, the paper mainly observes the single nucleotide variants, which is the most common genetic variant on regulatory regions of the DNA to predict the effects of mutation. And the aim of this deep learning in this field is to predict the effects of genetic variants that occur naturally and artificially through the editing of genomes and how it relates to the development of diseases. Next. In the second article called Deep Learning Limitations and Flaws, it discusses the limitations of deep learning through the elaboration of the limits of deep learning applications such as image recognition, which is the example they gave. It mentions the real-world applications of deep learning, such as automated driving to detect objects such as traffic lights and pedestrians, and also identifying objects from orbit and detecting cancer cells, among other examples. Next. In the third article called Deep Learning Enabled Medical Computer Vision, this particular article discusses the application of deep learning onto computer vision technology. It mainly focuses on the clinical applications of deep learning, specifically onto specialized medical fields, such as in cardiology. It is used mainly for screening and diagnosis, and most notably for echocardiography, which can assess several cardiac illnesses. Next. The fourth article called Review of Deep Learning Concepts, CNN Architectures, Challenges, Applications, and Future Directions. So in this paper, the authors have classified the applications of deep learning into 5 categories, mainly classification, localization, detection, segmentation, and registration. And here, one of the applications that they showed and that they explained in the paper was to acquire the characteristics of objects in order to understand what a sports car might seem like compared to a more comfortable car. This is the other examples that they gave in the paper were basically the same as the previous papers, mainly in the medical field. And for the last paper called Advantages of Hybrid Deep Learning Frameworks in Applications with Limited Data, it discusses the application of deep neural networks, DNNs, to detect multiple cardiac abnormalities combined with other techniques to achieve better performance. So specifically, deep learning here is applied to what's called heart rate variability analysis, which is part of cardiac diagnosis in the medical field. Next, the advantages and disadvantages of deep learning will be explained by Rafi.
Okay, I will explain the advantage and the limitation of the deep learning. Firstly, the advantage. From the 5 article that we review, overall there are 2 advantage that we spotted. First is the deep learning able to solve perceptual problem like speech and image recognition, since image recognition has been quite difficult for a system to be recognized, since what the system sees and what we see is completely different things. What the system see is basically not the image itself, but the data within the image. The second is deep learning does not depend on earlier information handling and can extract features. An example has been elaborated in the article. For example, it said that a deep DNN, a deep neural network, which is ordered to interpret a shape, will firstly try to interpret the simple edge in the first layer, and after that, 8 more advanced shape of the previously recognized edge in the first layer to the next layer. Next, the limitation. The first limitation is deep learning actually need a lot of data to function successfully. An example, a parable in the article say that, for example, as we human see call, we can just recognize the call by just a few look at the call, but the deep learning need around 10,000 plus examples to learn the concepts about the cow. The second is deep learning cannot explain on how the answer is produced. This happens due to the high predictive ability of deep learning, but deep learning really lacking in its interpretability. The last is the lack common sense, since the deep learning itself is lacking the interpretability. It's also lacking in common sense to explain on what data does, the deep learning does. Next, I think will be the conclusion. Will be continued by Imam Daru.
Okay, so for the conclusion of this study is that the deep learning approach is divided into three types, which are unsupervised, supervised, and partially supervised learning. So for the supervised learning consists of recurrent neural network and convolutional neural network. And some of the application in the work of deep learning are automated driving to detect objects such as traffic lights and pedestrians, cancer cell detection, and image recognition, and so on. And then the advantages of deep learning are powerful forms of machine learning because of its capabilities in solving perceptual problems in data, and also it does not depend on earlier information handling. And the limitation of the deep learning, it needs a lot of data in order for deep learning to function successfully.
Okay, I think
That's all for our presentation.
yes, the mention. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for watching. I think we can conclude them. And conclude it here. Thank you very much for watching, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.